Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are going completely down the rabbit hole. We're looking at a fascinating theory from our source material that argues the English language, along with ancient maritime laws, are actually designed to convert living, breathing humans into corporate assets. I know, it sounds wild, right? But whether you buy into it or not, the linguistic and historical foundations they use to build this theory are absolutely captivating. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with some proven linguistic origins of Old English, look at how pointing at something literally became property, unpack a very real law from 1666, and finally, look at how this theory claims you can literally escape the legal trap. Let's get into it. Right off the bat, we need to talk about how our language is structured. We're starting with a proven fact of linguistics. Ask yourself, why is English grammatically wired for ownership instead of sharing? It's a pretty provocative question. The source notes that English has this massive, highly specific vocabulary just for private ownership. Words like possess, dominate, monopolize. But when we try to describe shared or communal spaces, we rely on these borrowed, kind of weak words. The text argues that because our language evolved right alongside land deeding and trade, we are basically psychologically trained by our own grammar. We're forced to focus on the object being held rather than the shared environment. It's a proven fact that our dictionary expanded rapidly to protect what is mine, while the whole concept of ours got left with far fewer unique words.
Now, if we trace this ownership obsession back, we hit a massive shift over 1,000 years ago.
The text outlines that before the Viking invasions, pointing to a physical space and claiming ownership of an object were two completely different words. You had fair, meaning at that place, which is an entirely locational concept. And then you had hera, meaning belonging to them, purely about possession. But tracing this proven fact through history, the Viking invasions actually merged Anglo-Saxon and Norse vocabularies. Suddenly, the words for location and property started sounding identical. Over the centuries, there and there basically flattened out. And by the time the printing press locked in our spelling in the 1400s, this linguistic mashup led to a legal system where physical space and personal property became the exact same concept in our minds. Okay, so how does this linguistic bias connect to the law? Well, the source points straight to maritime admiralty law, the law of the sea. According to the theory, the legal system intentionally uses identical maritime terms to frame a biological birth as a commercial maritime event. Think about it. Just as a ship navigates a birth canal with an E and files a manifest, a child exits a mother's birth canal with an I and a birth certificate is registered. The theory argues that the state treats citizens as vessels operating in international commerce. Essentially, they're managing humans as cargo. Take a look at your own birth certificate. The source points out some very specific commercial terms hiding in plain sight. For example, a parent signs as an informant, which legally means someone providing data about an asset, effectively waiving absolute parental authority. Registration historically means handing legal title over to the sovereign, and the document claims crown copyright, meaning the state owns the persona. So, the source argues this isn't an identity document at all. It's a property receipt where the state assumes legal custody of you. And all of this culminates in the creation of what the theory calls the straw man. This is that all-caps corporate name you see on your driver's license, your passport, your tax forms. By creating this corporate straw man written in block capitals, the theory suggests the state can perfectly bypass the living, breathing human and interact solely with this legal fiction they created. This brings us to a very real, very wild piece of 17th century legislation. Here is a proven historical fact, a direct quote from the Cestui-Que-Vie Act of 1666, passed right after the Great Plague and Fire of London. It states that if a person remains beyond the seas for 7 years without proof of life, the judge shall direct a verdict as if they were dead. The text explains that this statute created a salvage trust to manage the property of missing citizens during a deeply chaotic time. But the source material theorizes that this exact architecture is still actively used today. How on earth does that work today? Well, the explainer source argues that when a modern birth is registered, the individual is formatted administratively as a missing entity, lost at sea. Because of this legally engineered presumption of death, the state sets up a salvage trust, allowing them to act as a trustee managing your labor and your identity as an abandoned asset. To anchor this theory, the source turns to the absolute standard authority for Western legal terms, Black's Law Dictionary. The strict legal definition here is absolutely vital because, in a juristic sense, a person is not actually a living being. According to the dictionary, it's an entity or franchise, a creation of the law, a persona ficta, including corporations and statutory constructs. It's designed primarily to enter contracts and pay taxes. So the source draws a super hard boundary line between a person and a natural man. They state that the natural man is the flesh and blood human being who holds inherent biological rights that exist prior to the law. Meanwhile, the person? That's merely a controlled administrative containment vessel, a subject of the state. The crucial point is how the system bridges this gap between the two. The source calls this joinder. According to the text, joinder is a linguistic trap where a natural man unknowingly answers to that corporate all-caps name. Imagine getting a court summons, standing up and saying, "Yeah, that's me." Boom, you've committed joinder. You're stepping off the solid land of natural rights and right onto the maritime ship of statutory liability. So, the obvious question is, how does the source material suggest you break out of this administrative cage? Well, the text insists that law is entirely a language game. To escape maritime jurisdiction, you literally have to stop using their commercial terms and start speaking the language of a sovereign on the land. You stop referring to yourself as the person and start using the natural man. You don't use a birth certificate, you use a record of live birth. It's all about shifting your vocabulary from statutory law into common law jurisdiction. And the source outlines specific, real-world steps to actually rebut this presumption of death under that 1666 Act. First, you submit a notice of corrected status to notify record holders that you are the beneficiary, not the surety. Then, you issue an affidavit of live birth to officially testify to your biological existence. Finally, it requires claiming the land by appearing in appropriate persona to directly challenge their jurisdiction and reclaim your estate from the state's trust. As we wrap up this explainer on the hidden mechanics of language and law, I really want you to ask yourself, in your everyday life, are you acting as a free, natural man, or are you just managing the cargo of a legal person? Look at the all-caps name on your ID. Which jurisdiction are you truly operating in? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for hanging out with us on this explainer.